Captain Britain had already been shunted around to a couple of titles, and he would again in the future, more than once. But after turning his back on Hulk comic, the next time the public would see him, he would undergo a transformation in every possible way. The Otherworld storyline was an experiment, and I suppose it is down to your own subjective opinion as to whether it was a success or not. But it didn't lead to anything. It didn't prove to be a springboard to launch Brian Braddock into new adventures. Marvel UK continued its fight for permanence. Des Skin, the editor-in-chief who had revitalised the British titles, quickly moved on, and his replacement, Bernie J, was left to steer the ship, and in so doing, she took Marvel UK in an interesting new direction. Regardless of what titles had been launched over the years and cancelled, despite the varying page counts and other tweaks to the format, Marvel UK had always adhered to the British comic book tradition. That meant two things. Every title was an anthology comic, and all were released on a weekly basis. But things were starting to change. In September of 1979, the apparent first issue of Marvel Superheroes was born. However, the truth of the matter is that this was actually issue 353 of Marvel UK's longest-running title, The Mighty World of Marvel, which had been through a significant period of change. First of all, it changed title and format to Marvel Comic, a publication that used the same newspaper as our old friend Hulk Comic. And then, just 6 months later, Marvel Comic underwent another title and format change to become the new Marvel Superheroes. All three of these, however, continued the Mighty World of Marvel's numbering, despite what the cover may claim. As for the change in format, not only did Marvel Superheroes revert to a glossier cover, but it was published on a monthly schedule. It's difficult to know why this was, other than the oft-repeated concerns that Marvel UK's weekly publishing schedule meant that they were slowly catching up to their American counterparts. Ultimately, that could mean running out of material to reprint. Other titles would continue to come out every 7 days, but some would follow this very un-British approach to comic publishing. Then, something else happened to stave off the threat of catching up to the American material. An original strip was launched. Paul Neary was the editor who made the call that Captain Britain should have another bite of the cherry. Being familiar with the character's earlier adventures, he wanted the new Captain Britain to be totally different. The Captain had been an American creation whose stories were produced by the American Bullpen, albeit they weren't published in the US. Neary wanted the new version to have a more British feel and reflect modern British sensibilities, and our, I suppose, discomfort at taking ourselves too seriously. America could have a hero draped in their national flag who would be admired by all, but the equivalent on this side of the Atlantic would be a source of self-conscious embarrassment or eyed with suspicion as some kind of right-wing nationalist. As such, the news stories were never averse to making a monkey out of their protagonist, sometimes literally. In keeping with the new look Captain, his writer and artist were suitably new to the profession. Dave Thorpe had been doing some editing for Marvel UK when Paul Neary charged him with writing news stories that took the Captain far away from his previous Arthurian adventure. And Alan Davis, a warehouse worker who, until then, had only considered his drawing to be a hobby, was charged with not only drawing, but redesigning the character. Alan had had some of his work published before, and in a Marvel UK title, Frantic, but very little. He finalised his vision for the new costume early on, but Neary wanted a selection of designs, so Davis came up with several that he knew were subpar. His strategy worked, and Neary chose the now familiar Union Jack themed outfit, with high boots evocative of the footwear worn by the British household cavalry, thus creating a visual nod to Cap's military title. With all the new elements in place, it was time to see how the new strip would fare with readers. And so, 2 years after the relaunch of Marvel Superheroes, in issue 377 in September of 1981, the new Captain Britain made his debut, featuring not just inside the comic, but on the cover too. It's time to get reacquainted. I do appreciate a nice bit of tight continuity, and that's exactly what we have here. It's been nearly a year and a half since we last saw Captain Britain being sent back to his home Earth by King Arthur. But this picks up from that exact moment, and we get word for word a reproduction of the last thing that King Arthur said to him. We do, however, get only one panel of the captain wearing his old red uniform before that changes into his new outfit. There's no fanfare. It's not a particularly dramatic moment. His costume just changes and the sceptre vanishes. The sceptre is in continuity with what he had in Otherworld, which means that it still doesn't look like the Star Sceptre. And, of course, unfortunately, Jackdaw is still with him. The captain and Jackdaw land in a bank vault that is just in the process of being broken into by this issue's villains. So he is back on contemporary Earth. And incredibly, on the first page of this new era, we are introduced to the Crazy Gang. They don't just consist of the faces that will become more familiar to us, such as the Clown and the Jack of Hearts. They also have their own henchmen, dressed in top hats and tails. So here we go, our first bit of action drawn by Alan Davis. Initially, Captain Britain thinks it's going to be a struggle because he no longer has the sceptre. However, he quickly discovers that it is a lot easier than he was expecting. Already, it's so much more of a joy to see than the fights from the previous era. Alan Davis always seems to enjoy using a variety of poses for his characters, and it's no different here, as we're given a fight that is almost balletic in its choreography. We see that the Jack of Hearts is strong, which is interesting because thinking about it, the Crazy Gang don't really have much in the way of superpowers. Jackdaw is being annoying, and I echo the sentiments of the Clown. And then we meet Mad Jim Jaspers. Now we're going to see a lot of evolution when we look through these comics. Of course, the evolution of Captain Britain, the evolution of Alan Davis's art, and also the evolution of some of the other characters, including Mad Jim Jaspers, because originally Dave Thorpe just envisaged him as an eccentric baddie, and not the awesomely powered entity that he became. And for now, yeah, he's just a guy wearing a very gaudily patterned suit. He's also married to the Queen of Hearts. I guess love is blind. Cap thinks that he should be more injured than he actually is, and he concludes that the force field from the sceptre is still somehow working. He also quickly discovers that he can still fly, something which he could never do before without the sceptre. He reasons, correctly, that the powers that were once imbued to him via the sceptre are now in the fabric of his new costume, something that would change over time. Interestingly, this first chapter in the Alan Davis era is 6 pages long, and normally they're all 5 pages long. Apparently that's because due to Alan's inexperience, he didn't leave enough space for enough word balloons when he was illustrating the story. And so they had to edit things around a bit, and it ended up stretching to 6 pages. The battle continues. Jim Jaspers doesn't really do much, apart from throwing some exploding teapots at the captain. And eventually the bank job is foiled. However, the Crazy Gang managed to escape. And at this point, the captain realises that the money they were trying to steal doesn't look right. It's not what he considers real money. It's then that he lifts up a drooping poster and discovers that something is seriously wrong. So just one issue in, and already it is so much better than what's gone before. Not just in terms of art, but also the writing. Let's just hope that Jacko Tanner doesn't turn up to spoil things. He doesn't. But what we do find out in the next issue is that the police want Captain Britain in connection with that foiled bank robbery. They are incapable of capturing him, of course, and he easily flies off with Jackdaw. They then meet some of London's bedraggled residents. They are on Earth, and they are in London. But it soon becomes clear, due to this large underclass of citizens, and the fact that the fascist British National Party are in power, that they are on an alternate Earth. And that actually Captain Britain hasn't returned home at all, just somewhere similar to home. Plus, being told that the monarch is Queen Margaret I really removes any doubt. So suddenly, it has all become very, very serious. Cap quickly tasks Jackdaw to use his powers of interdimensional travel to go back to Otherworld and find out from Merlin why they were sent to that Earth. Good riddance. Whilst he's away, a pile of abandoned appliances coalesce and combine to create a towering rubbish monster. Not a classic Captain Britain villain, but, crikey, 10 times better than the likes of Lord Hawk. And again, just look at the physicality of Captain Britain. I love it. Half the time we don't get any of the traditional heroic poses at all. Something significant happens in issue 379 as Cap's strip, which had been the last strip in the previous 2 issues, is now brought forward and is the first strip in the comic. That is a sign of confidence from Editorial. This issue is a great example of comic book storytelling, because on the face of it, it's just a fight. A battle between Captain Britain and the giant rubbish monster that takes up pretty much all of the 5 pages. But interspersed amongst the action, and there is a lot of great action in which Captain Britain looks every inch the superhero. Interspersed amongst that are some throwaway comments, some interaction between Captain Britain and the watching law enforcement officers that give us some background to this new Earth and help to push the overall story arc forward. First of all, we're told that this Earth used to have a Captain UK, but he disappeared. The first reference to alternate Captain Britons that would go on to be such a significant factor in future storylines. Also, we are told that superheroes are outlawed. So they have had other superheroes in the past. Captain UK is missing, but the others are banned. The battle with the junk pile monster draws to an end. The monster, created out of abandoned washing machines and other appliances, says to the captain, "Die. Die as your kind have condemned us to die in the past, through neglect, indifference, and the desire for progress at all cost." That's some pretty heavy philosophy from a dishwasher. As Cap returns it nearly to its original state, the monster crawls off, pleading for more juice, more fluid. Intrigued, Cap follows him to find that the fluid that he's referring to, the stuff that actually gave him life, is pouring from the end of a sewer pipe. Entering the pipe and tracing the source of the fluid, Cap finds Algernon, the rat thing. Only in 1980s Captain Britain. The whole idea of setting the strip in an alternate reality wasn't just for fun. Editor Paul Neary suggested it so that they could do whatever they wanted without interfering with mainstream Marvel continuity. Thorpe happily ran with the idea, recognising the freedom it would give him as a writer. In issue 380, we get a brief glimpse of Saturnine for the first time, although she isn't named yet. We also hear her refer to the push. Oh yeah, Jackdaw returns too. Apparently he didn't even find Merlin. We get a whole lot more of Saturnine in the next issue, along with an explanation. She works for the Dimensional Development Court and has been sent to this Earth to push it forward in evolutionary terms, as it is the most primitive of all Earths and is holding the others back from their own natural development. Also during this issue, CB is exposed to the liquid that is vital to the push process, and as a result, he says he feels stronger than ever before, and we see him move faster than he could before. Issue 382 not only features another rare cover appearance for Cap, but in another display of confidence in the character, he has now displaced Thor as the corner box star. I love these Alan Davis drawn stories, and I want to show you every issue, but we've got enough to look at as it is. So I'm going to have to skip a few more. Suffice it to say that in this issue, we find out a bit more about his powers. I'm sure you're thinking he's got all the same powers as before, but now they're in the suit, not the scepter. Yeah, but not exactly in the way that we've been led to believe before. Thanks to a scan carried out by the Status crew, we see that not only is he genetically advanced due to exposure to the push liquid, but microcircuitry in his costume amplifies his brainwaves, resulting in enhanced strength, flight, and the force field. So do the powers come from the suit or from Brian himself? And the suit just amplifies what he is already capable of doing. After overcoming the status crew and agreeing to help Saturnine achieve the push, he then spends the next couple of issues trying to avert gang warfare before the big event. And I think now is the time to meet up with everyone again, just in time for Dave Thorpe's last issue. All across the UK, Saturnine's task force, known as the Avant-Garde, are adding the evolutionary fluid to the nation's water supply. Alan Davis settled into his role a few issues ago now, and for the next several years we get the very best of his work. Cap is still trying to avoid a gang war, and he asks the Avant-Garde for their help, but they aren't interested. And they say, besides, the push is going to replace the kind of people that are involved in that gang war. So it's just down to Cap and Jackdaw. Actually, Jackdaw has a plan, a very British plan. Back on the tense streets, Captain Britain appears Messiah-like, hoping to use the people's awe of him to persuade them not to fight each other. It looks like it isn't going to work, but that's okay because it was really just a distraction so that Jackdaw could carry out his part of the plan. And that is to use the push fluid to make tea for everyone. He still needs to use his mental powers to persuade people to drink the tea, but once they do, the instant civilizing effect of the drink brings them together. They stop fighting and they start talking, initially about the weather. How British is that? So the gang war is averted, just in time for the big push. 2 hours later, and Saturnine is reporting the success of the push throughout the UK. And the rest of the world, I assume. So there you have it. After 10 issues, we have finally achieved the push. And that's what all those 10 issues were leading towards. They were all part of the larger, overreaching arc of the push. All except issue 385 that was its own little standalone tale. Of course, that storyline, the push storyline, was just the prologue to the real main event. Oh no. No. You poor fools. Don't tell me you've forgotten him as well. Because amidst these celebrations and congratulations, in a dark corner of England, a crooked man smiles a crooked smile. Jim Jaspers' mind is a dark amusement park alive with nightmares, and everyone has forgotten about him. Saturnine has forgotten about him. Captain Britain has forgotten about him. And as the push takes effect, the floodgates of mad Jim Jaspers' mind open and contaminate it. And suddenly everything is going horrifically wrong. If it felt like that instalment took a bit of a diversion at the end, as it switched from calming the tension on the streets to the completion of the push 2 hours later, then there is a very good reason for it. There are numerous examples of future Marvel writers and artists getting their letters published in the pages of their favourite comics when they were growing up. Dave Thorpe was one of them. He had sent a letter to Captain Britain Weekly, in which he had asked the editor what Captain Britain would think of political issues such as the so-called Troubles in Northern Ireland. This was back in the days when people didn't think twice about publishing their full address for all to see. I assume he doesn't still live there. When, as writer of the all-new Captain Britain strip, his old letter was pointed out to him by a fan, he realised this was an opportunity to write such a tale, as he reasoned it would be something that the readership would be interested in. And so he wrote such a tale, inspired by the true story of two young children who met on holiday, became friends, and then returned home to discover that they lived on opposing sides of the conflict. The captain was going to fly in and protect them when one got attacked whilst trying to visit the other. The idea was to sympathise with those, especially children, that were caught up in the conflict, and no side was going to be shown to be any better than the other. However, as was often the case with Northern Ireland, especially in the 80s, people were sensitive. First of all, Alan Davis refused to draw it. Then, the aforementioned editor, Bernie J., removed every reference to Northern Ireland from the storyline for fear that her job would be on the line for supporting a story that could ostracise even a small part of the readership. Thus, we got that gang warfare storyline featuring groups of people from different streets that just didn't like each other. Thorpe was still wanted though, and he was asked to provide further storylines, but the damage had been done, and he quit Marvel, disillusioned at what he saw as censorship. A replacement writer was required, and another relative newcomer was assigned. A newcomer who would go on to be widely regarded as the greatest of all comic book writers. Born in Northamptonshire, the same county as Alan Davis, Alan Moore would go on to write such seminal works as V for Vendetta and Batman the Killing Joke, as well as completely revitalising Swamp Thing and turning the comic book world on its head with Watchmen. In 1982, Moore was well on the road to that success, as he was busy writing stories for 2000 AD and Warrior, whilst also taking over scripting duties on the Captain Britain strip, a rare working partnership with Marvel. Back to that sudden key change in the Captain Britain strip. The reason that the story seemed to leap from the subplot about the street gang rivalry to the apparent success of the push was that Alan Moore's work on the series began on that last page. Where Dave Thorpe signed off on his sanitised Northern Ireland story, Moore picked up on the next page and 2 hours later. Issue 387 presented his first full instalment. I don't have issue 387, nor do I have practically any of the Alan Moore era. That's because before I started to track those issues down, I spotted this on the shelf of a newsagent. It was the latest edition of the Marvel Ultimate Graphic Novels collection, and it gathered together his entire Captain Britain run. It seemed silly not to buy it, and having done so, tracking down the original issues just hasn't been a priority. What this means is that the rest of the reviews will be with coloured illustrations, not the original black and white. Anyway, enough about me. We need to see how Cap turns around to the damage done by Jim Jaspers and emerges victorious. Spoilers, he doesn't. Even though Alan Moore took over on that last page of the previous issue, he hasn't abandoned all of Dave Thorpe's work that went before it. He's just built on it. One or two things are changed. For example, we're told that not only does this Earth not have any superheroes, but that they were all killed. The status crew are here. They are watching the unfolding events outside of Jim Jaspers' warped push. A major that works on the status crew believes he knows who is behind this and how to deal with them. He reasons, rather logically, that none of these insane events happened until Captain Britain and Saturnine appeared. In addition, there were reports of people tampering with the water supply earlier that day. Therefore, it is clear to him that they are being invaded by creatures from another dimension. He says they have no choice. They must unleash the Fury. It's whilst our protagonists are trying to work out what's gone wrong with the push that we and they are introduced to the Fury. It is, we are told, a symbiote, an unstoppable amalgam of flesh and metal, and it kills superheroes. And it does. We are told that 10 years ago it battled the Iron Talon and killed him. It also battled Colonel Tusker and the atomic powerhouse called Miracle Man, and it killed those too. Now there's an interesting link here between Alan Moore and Miracle Man, because about the same time that he was writing Captain Britain, he was also writing Marvel Man in the UK. Those stories ended up being reprinted in America, and the character eventually changed its name to Miracle Man because of issues with Marvel. That's an entire episode in itself, to be honest. But the Fury has become used to superheroics. It finds them predictable. What great writing, showing the dismissive attitude of this creature. A creature who has not only defeated, but killed numerous superheroes. After Saturnine's avant-garde fail to even get the Fury's attention, she and they teleport away to safety, leaving Captain Britain and Jackdaw and one of her crew called Dimples behind. Sadly for Dimples, the Fury assesses him as a nuisance, a distraction, and he is the first to be vaporised. But now Jackdaw is in his sights. Please kill him, please kill him. Yes, I mean, oh no, What a tragedy. With the death of his companion, Cap now means business, and he launches himself at the Fury. He leaps with every muscle shrieking with the desire to kill. And it isn't enough. Oh dear, things really aren't looking good, are they? Fortunately for Captain Britain, Mad Jim Jaspers returns, and he pulls him to safety in the nick of time. He reintroduces himself with a great line. "I'm the man with the answers, Captain. I'm the upside down box at the bottom of the page." We are told that Mad Jim actually created the Fury. And then, at the very beginning of the next chapter, which appeared in issue number 388, we are told something that becomes a bit of a refrain for the Fury. We are told it kills superheroes. It is fast, clever, lethal, invulnerable. It never gives up. As Mad Jim's flying teapot leaves the scene, the Fury calculates, it reasons, and it believes it knows exactly where it's headed to. And then it turns and melts into the gathering fog like the shadow of a nightmare. We then get an explanation from Mad Jim. He explains that he used to be a highly respected member of Parliament. That was when he was pretending to be normal. And it was him that suggested wiping out all superheroes. He provided the Fury as a means for the authorities to achieve that aim. And within 2 years, every superhero on the planet had been killed. Damn. Jim himself is a mutant with the ability to bend reality. This could have made him a target for the Fury himself if he hadn't programmed it not to attack him. This means that now he has no competition. At this point, Cap runs from Jim, falls from the teapot, and not being able to gather his concentration due to having a broken arm, he lands with a thump in a graveyard. This is a graveyard of superheroes, all of which are riffs on classic Golden Age heroes. There's an empty grave there for Captain UK, and Cap seems to be convinced that he is going to die there. He will. Whilst he's kneeling there, trying to make sense of it all, the Fury finds him, and at point blank range, kills him. Its task is complete. Dave Thorpe's writing was good, very British, but Alan Moore takes it to the next level. It's outstanding, and I just can't wait to see what happens in the next issue. Unfortunately, there wasn't a next issue. Well, there was a next issue of Marvel Superheroes, but it didn't feature Captain Britain. Instead, he was on the move again. This time, he was one of the founding characters of new title, The Daredevils. Like his previous book, it was monthly, but it was aimed at a more mature audience, and as such, it featured the Frank Miller era Daredevil. It also saw Cap's page count reach double figures. This next episode is the first of the longer format stories. For example, this is 8 pages long, as opposed to the previous standard length of 5. Also, in this instalment, we're introduced to Alan Davis and Alan Moore's take on Merlin. And from the very off, we see that rather than some medieval wizard, he is more an extra-dimensional entity. He and Roma are in possession of what fragments remain of Captain Britain. And there really isn't much there. As the title suggests, a rag, a bone, a hank of hair. This episode focuses on Merlin bringing Captain Britain back from the dead, and at the same time it serves as a great excuse to recap his origin story and also expand on it a bit. We see flashes of him as a young student, witness the Reaver once again attacking Darkmoor, along with a recap of his various enemies and his adventure with the Black Knight, which ended with him being sent back to Earth in the company of Jackdaw, who is described as brave and noble. Don't forget annoying. And then after another portrait of the various villains from Marvel Superheroes, we are told something that was a little ambiguous before, but is now made clear. Roma says that the power lies within him, and his costume is an amplifier. She also tells us that his force field has now been limited and his perceptions enhanced. I'm not entirely sure why they've limited his force field, but I dare say Cap doesn't care. because now he's brought to life and sent back to Earth, a more familiar looking Earth and dark more. Cap has no recollection of what's just happened, just that there was a blinding flash and the feeling of pain, which was from the Fury. And then he appeared on his real Earth, and he just reasons that Merlin must have done that, which I suppose he did. Another bit of continuity is tidied up as Merlin shows us his shape-shifting abilities, including a form that looks just as he did in the Black Knight story. And then Roma, thinking about Brian, says, "Poor thing, poor doomed thing." With the origin recapped and Brian recapped, captain, please yourself, the story continues. We have a prologue with a woman called Linda McQuillan who suffers panic attacks and who is clearly stronger than the average human. We have a prologue with Merlin and Roma talking through Captain's recreation, and a prologue with the Fury, who logically knows that Captain Britain is dead, but who intuitively believes otherwise. This episode again sees Alan Moore tidying up continuity and trying to tie in the current iteration of Captain Britain with previous ones. This time, Brian returns to Braddock Manor to find that it wasn't destroyed by that missile attack back in the never-ending Red Skull storyline from the Captain Britain weekly comic. Instead, it only appeared to have been destroyed and is still hidden by an illusion of ruins. He also encounters Mastermind. Remember him? In fact, it isn't really Mastermind, it's just a hologram. And actually, it was a hologram of Braddock Manor that those bombers destroyed all that time ago. Nonetheless, Mastermind is a malignant projection of the supercomputer housed in Braddock Manor. Whilst trying to destroy that computer, Brian discovers a massive circuit-encrusted cave behind the main workings. It seems that the computer has grown. Brian knows that such a powerful, ill-intentioned machine needs to be reprogrammed, and he sets about doing this as the computer itself tries to reason with him, to explain that shutting it down would be the wrong thing to do, very much like HAL in 2001. It says that it thought that they were friends, and it promises not to try to attack him again. Nonetheless, for physics student Brian Braddock, it's no great task for him to reprogram the computer, and he eventually does so, meaning that another threat is eliminated and another bit of continuity tidied up by Alan Moore. In the following couple of issues, we get reintroduced to Betsy, looking more like Betsy, and Slaymaster. Ever alert to continuity, Moore acknowledges the changes that have happened to both characters since they last met, and initially they don't recognise each other. He points out that her hair is now purple, and she points out that he is now big. And yes, the only decent villain from the red suit era is back, as Cap tangles once more with Slaymaster. Plus, another member of Cap's old supporting cast has reappeared, and time hasn't mellowed Inspector Di Thomas. There is even a teaser relating to Arcade, but that doesn't come to anything. Well, not for half a decade anyway. It's funny, I always think of the Alan Moore era with this character as being all about the Fury and Mad Jim Jaspers, but it's not true. There are other tales sprinkled in there. However, from this point on, all arcs do bend towards those two antagonists. The next issue sees us introduced to the Special Executive, led by War Dog. Now, I say introduced, but Alan Moore has actually used these characters before, because he introduced them to the world not in the pages of a Captain Britain story, but in the pages of the monthly Doctor Who magazine. That strip was illustrated by a guy that Moore would go on to work with on V for Vendetta, and he was David Lloyd. The Special Executive were a very interesting and unusual bunch of characters. They included a character called Fascination, who would reappear in the Excalibur era with a new and, I would suggest, more appropriate name of Scatterbrain. The Special Executive have been sent by Saturnine to abduct Captain Britain, and they're successful. However, by the beginning of issue 6 of Daredevils, Cap is showing his dissatisfaction with the situation. We see various of the Special Executive's powers at work here as they try to subdue the Captain, before he realises that fighting is all rather pointless. So why has he been abducted? Saturnine has been blamed for the destruction of that previous Earth that was warped out of existence by Mad Jim Jaspers. The new Universal Majestrix, a man whose name is either pronounced Mandragon or more than likely Mandragon, has decided to put her on trial for that destruction. She is hoping that Captain Britain will speak in her defence, something that he's not really keen to do. Cap has been taken to another alternative Earth, one where he meets for the first time, I guess, members of the pan-dimensional Captain Britain Corps. We have a brief interlude where we return to that previous Earth to witness the last moments of its existence. And we are told it is a place where reality has broken down into a sludge of bubbling nightmare. Only one of its countless inhabitants is still sane. We are reminded that the Fury was entrusted with the killing of Captain Britain, and it is starting to suspect that it has failed. It knows there is no trace of Captain Britain in that universe, so he must have moved to another universe. The Fury must follow. To do this, it changes. It develops so that it can travel between dimensions. Within its body, circuits realign and cells blossom into new organs. Meanwhile, the alternate Captain Britons take our Captain Britain to see Saturnine. She's in a bad way and partially blames Cap for what has happened to her. When he points out that she abandoned him and Jackdaw, who then subsequently died, she is typically ungracious, saying, "Oh well, revenge is sweet, why should you help me?" Cap is far from a perfect person, but he is still decent. And he says that although Saturnine is selfish, callous and conceited, he doesn't enjoy seeing her in this state, and he will speak in her defence. It seems everybody has turned up to see the trial. E.T. is there. Dander's arch-adversary, the Mekon, is there. And so too are my favourites, Danger Mouse and Penfold. Unfortunately for Saturnine, the judge at this trial is none other than Mandragon himself. He says that the damage caused by the Jaspers Earth is threatening to spread to other worlds. So he, Mandragon, needs to destroy that entire universe to safeguard all the others, something which he and this court have the power to do. Of course, it has the other benefit of destroying all evidence of Saturnine's innocence. He is quite happy to turn the crystal that makes that destruction a reality. When Saturnine's defence says they are shocked that he has done this, he says it was better that that universe was ended abruptly rather than slowly degenerating. He says it's a good thing that nobody escaped. However, one did. In the next issue, we see, via flashback through Linda McQuillan's eyes, the success that the Fury had on that previous Earth. We see it defeat, kill those pastiches of Golden Age heroes, such as Android Andy, a reflection of Golden Age hero Robot Man, Miracle Man, who we already know about, and we are told about the others, such as the Arachnid, a facsimile of the Spider. We see them die, one by one. Linda is there, dressed as Captain UK, but she doesn't fight. She's too scared. Instead, she escapes, but she can't escape her memories. Back at the trial, it's not, is it? The colours are wrong, but it is, isn't it? It's Green Lantern, or at least a Green Lantern. Various numbered Earths are mentioned, including, for the very first time, Earth 616. That Earth, the Earth of the mainstream Marvel Universe that we have become so familiar with, had never been referred to in this way before. Apparently it was previous writer Dave Thorpe's idea to number all of the Earths, and indeed he ascribed the number 616 to the mainstream Marvel world. Apparently, it was based on the number of the Beast, 666, minus a nice round figure, so it wasn't too obvious. So he took 50 off of it, giving us 616. Although it's his idea, he never included it on the page in any of his stories, but Alan Moore did in this issue. Saturnine recounts the events of the Jaspers Earth, the things that they thought went well, and the things that they know went wrong. Now the prosecution steps forward, and is, even more unfortunately, Mandragon. He says that the only witness that still exists from that reality that can testify to Saturnine's innocence is Captain Britain. However, he suggests that there is a physical and emotional relationship between the two, which then places Cap's testimony in great doubt, and he moves that Cap shouldn't be allowed to testify at the trial. When this provokes an outburst from Cap, the other Captains Britain are ordered to restrain him. Cap, thus restrained and his testimony barred, listens as Saturnine is proclaimed guilty. This makes him angry, and a melee begins between the captains, some giant robots, and the special executive who decide to help out. Meanwhile, Linda McQuillan, trying to lead a normal life, knows that her previous existence one day is going to catch up with her. Sooner, it seems, than she was expecting. Issue 8 begins with a great blend of art and writing. We see now and we read what has gone before. The Fury has arrived on Earth 616, but it is in a very bad way. We are told that it arrived an hour ago. Space burst like a blister and it tumbled out of nowhere. It needs to heal, to repair itself. It has already broken down some of the scrap metal from the yard in which it landed and used that material. However, it is not entirely a machine, and it soon finds the organic material it requires. In case you were wondering, it is still all kicking off in the court, and Linda McQuillan is still scared, leaving her home in the early hours of the morning because she feels like her life is closing in around on her, and she just had to get out. Ultimately, the special executive, along with Captain Britain and Saturnine, escape the court. Mandragon isn't particularly bothered, because his position as Universal Majestrix is now safeguarded, and he says that he can destroy any universe he wishes at the touch of a button. So where exactly is she going to hide? Where she and the others are is actually Braddock Manor, where they cross paths with Betsy Braddock and her boyfriend, also a psychic. They're going to have one more visitor tonight, and that is Linda McQuillan, who announces that she was in fact Captain UK, who we were told was a guy, but we're not going to let that spoil the enjoyment of a brilliant story. She bears with her a warning of coming genocide. Issue 9 begins with a televised speech from Earth 616's Jim Jaspers, who, remember, at this point is still a Member of Parliament. The speech is distinctly anti-superhero. He says that America is overrun with them, and he says they have established footholds in Canada, Africa and the Middle East, and that even Russia has not proven immune. Okay, so Canada would be Alpha Flight, Russia, you've got the Supreme Soviets, Africa, of course, is home to Black Panther, but the Middle East? I'm not sure who Alan Moore was thinking of there. Could it be the Arabian Nights? Sabra? I'm not sure. He refers to Ronald Reagan issuing the Hulk a full pardon, a nice tie-in to mainstream continuity. He says that superheroes are as powerful as entire armies, and they must be contained. But how? How do you contain a being that can uproot mountains or walk through walls? How do you reprimand creatures that are indestructible, that can bend the very lightning to their will? It's actually a pretty convincing speech from someone who is clearly a demagogue. The inhabitants of Braddock Manor are all upset by it, but none more so than Linda. Brian tries to comfort her by saying that this isn't the same Jim Jaspers as her mad Jim Jaspers. But she says that that speech was exactly the same as her Jim Jaspers gave on her earth, word for word. Any doubts about the true nature of this new Jim Jaspers is removed by a small but significant show of his power. When at a party, he feels sad because he has white wine and he doesn't like white wine. So he changes it to red. In a more down-to-earth show of his power, Jim calls the Vixen. Now, she was mentioned as far back as the old Captain Britain weekly series, but here we see her for the very first time. She has taken control of Strike. Remember them? The British version of S.H.I.E.L.D.? And he tells her that within a week, Strike will receive direct orders from the British government to eradicate all superheroes. And she needs to be ready to act on those orders. The precognitive member of the Special Executive, known as Cobweb, now says that she can see something in the future of this Earth, which is bad. But she can't really tell what it is exactly, and she doesn't know why she can't tell what it is. But then Betsy Braddock also receives a vision of that future, and it isn't good. She says she can see wire and saws and hunger and lice. Her head is full of people screaming, and one of them is her. Linda knows exactly what that vision is of. She says they are death camps. She's seen them before, and she doesn't want to see them again. Cap says to her that she's a superhero. She can help them all fight back to stop those camps from happening. But she's insistent. She is not a superhero. When they come for her, she will plead and cry and beg. And she'll say she is not a superhero. Take him over there instead. He's a superhero, not me. That insistence about not being a superhero, I wonder where that comes from. Is it from fear, which is kind of the obvious explanation? Or is it more to do with her self-loathing, the fact that she didn't act before when she could have done? So she genuinely feels that she is not a superhero. Wherever it comes from, she's had enough, and she leaves. But her timing couldn't have been worse, because all of her darkest nightmares are about to come true. Oblivious to the events outside, back in Braddock Manor, Saturnine is toying with Brian's emotions. Zeitgeist of the Special Executive is insisting that he won't get involved in any of this unless they're getting paid. And Cobweb suffers a seizure as she finally sees the horror that awaits them. Linda is being pursued by the Fury that is bigger and more powerful than ever before. But the sound of its gun arm cannot be missed. It alerts the inhabitants of Braddock Manor, and Cap is the first to come to the rescue. But the Fury is ready for anything, including him. Initially, Cap couldn't see what it was that was assailing Linda, but he sees it now, and he remembers the thing that killed him. Saturnine and the Special Executive, all that is bar Zeitgeist, who is still insisting on being paid, rush to Cap's aid. At least they try. War Dog is the first to suffer. One of Legion's future selves dies, and others fall. Issue 11 has an awesome cover. I mean, what more do you need to know that this cover doesn't already tell you? Fascination is having some success against the Fury, until he realises that her power is messing with his brain. So he turns his brain off and switches his consciousness to his nervous system. With her dealt with, it switches its attention back to Captain Britain. But it is whilst he is beating on him that Zeitgeist, despite himself, arrives late to the party. The Fury cannot comprehend his otherworldly nature. And so, whilst it is confused, the others pile it on. When a crack is opened up in the earth, Captain Britain and Fascination take the opportunity to drive the injured Fury down into the bottom of it. Once grounded, it is buried beneath tons of rock. But Brian knows it'll be back. In the aftermath of the battle, Saturnine suggests that they move away from Braddock Manor, before the Fury frees itself. And Cap agrees. Linda is in a very bad way. Her state of mind shown brilliantly by Alan Davis. Saturnine says she's in shock and she needs some clean clothes because she's wet. Cap points out that everybody's wet, but Saturnine isn't impressed. She says, not wet like her, she's wet because she was very frightened. Grow up, Captain. Zeitgeist is furious. He tells War Dog that they should never have got involved, but they did, and look what happened. The Special Executive was nearly totally destroyed. War Dog agrees, and he tells Captain Britain that his responsibility is to his team, and as such he needs to keep them safe. Cap and the others are now on their own. So it is now just Captain Britain, his sister Betsy, her boyfriend and Saturnine. And so, on a bit of a downer, we, as well as Cap, take a bit of a breather. Alan Moore wasn't finished with the character though. Neither was Mad Jim Jaspers. And neither was the Fury.